Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and welcome if you're new to the virtual Agile meetup. And if you're returning, I certainly recognise some names, so it's so good to have you back. We love that people are really enjoying these sessions. So again, you know what? We've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, and I always forget about this page. I say thank you before clicking next, but again, reiterating thank you for coming to us. Genuinely, we only run this because we've got a community of people who are actually interested in this sort of stuff, and you guys keep coming back, which is really good. And we know that this time is precious. It's either kids' time or, I don't know, breakfast time or one other time, and the fact that you're spending it with us really, really does mean a lot. So thank you. Speaking of time, how long are we going to be here? Well, we have got 57 minutes left on the clock. So I'm going to run through this pretty quickly because obviously we have a wonderful speaker with us today, Johanna, that we're very excited to have. As you can see, we are recording. It was in the spiel. So if you don't want to be recorded, then, feel free to turn your cameras off. But rest assured, this goes on YouTube, and that's about it. So nobody ever sees it. No, everybody sees it. We also, in terms of chat and questions and things like that, we like to utilize the chat. If you've got something cool you want to share, something interesting, whack it in the chat. We are interested in hearing about it. That's the whole point of this virtual Agile meetup. For any questions for Johanna here, then please pop those also in the chat, and we will definitely come back to those. If we miss them, then do give us a prod, because we like to think that we can facilitate this well, but we are also only human. And that's about it on some of those things. Fire exits, actually, I forgot. You're all responsible. If there is a fire in your home, get out. Don't worry about this. We record it. There's opportunities. My fire exit is over there. Yours may be somewhere different. Anyway, rock, paper, scissors. So folks, if you are returning, and you might be bored of this game already, but I love rock, paper, scissors. I use it probably every week, let's say every month maybe now. And it's a really good tool. First of all, it's universal. Most people know rock, paper, scissors either as a game, but I've manipulated it for decisions, for understanding people's views, for all sorts of different things. So we're going to give this a go now. First of all, I want to see your best. That's a rock, not a potato, by the way. Your best rock. So if you're on camera, can you show me a rock or a potato? Beautiful. Okay, next up. Lovely. Next up is a piece of paper. Oh, yes. Who's that with the mat? Nice piece of paper. I think you would get beaten in the game, though, but that's cool. I love the idea. I love the different way of thinking. And lastly, the scissors. Now, I have to remember, if you've had a bad day, just be careful what you're showing us. Yeah, okay. Cool. Scissors, beautiful. Right, so the aim of this game is really basic. We're going to show, or you're going to show, a rock, a paper, or a scissors to whether you agree, whether you're not sure, or you disagree with any of the 3 questions or statements that I read it out. Sometimes this doesn't match up very well, and I realize I had a tired day when I was preparing it, but let's give it a go. So, question number 1. It's much harder to share problems as distributed teams because it ends up chaotic. A rock, a paper, or a scissor? Oh, we've got some agreements, we've got some papers. Perfect. You're here. This is a great place to be for it. Question number 2. Feedback is often a, here's my problem, you go fix it. Not, here's my problem, how do we fix it? I've heard many different ways of it. And the last one here, we've got quite a few scissors in there, actually, which is really good to hear that this is my problem and actually we want to go and fix it ourselves. I love that. Last one is team working agreements are seen as fluffy and non-binding. There is definitely a mix of views on that, which is interesting. Well, thank you. That's it. That's my game. That's all it is. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Please take rock, paper, scissors and do powerful things with it. Um, and I'm going to pass on to my wonderful co-host, Ines.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so actually, I just wanted to take a moment because believe it or not, we have been doing this for 4 years. And Helen and I have been working with, in some sort of form of another, of distributed teams for a long time. And this started, if you've done the math, back in 2020, because many people reached out and was in a bit of a pickle because there seems to be, rather than just very odd circumstances, also in the way that they work, something new and something difficult. And it all started that way. So we created this space where we can talk about those concerns, those questions. How could Agile, in fact, work in a distributed or satellite or many different hybrid forms that it could take? And that really kicked this group up and the sessions into action, into a reality. And for that, I want to thank you. And also to say that today, finally, we have Johanna Rothman. It's been a long time coming for our virtual Agile. And we are so very happy to have you on board. For the ones that may not know, Johanna is known as the pragmatic manager and super frank, honest, and to the point, very tangible way to approach content. And she consults with leaders and teams to learn and make reasonable options on the context. And well, the trademark, you do so many things, but from being tangible, practical, also humor, you also authored more than 20 nonfiction books, plus many other adventures. And those books span from the topics of management, of product development, personal development, and again, the content I always find it super like on point and effective. And so, yeah, some time back we had Mark Kilby in the sessions, and you both co-author a book that is about distributed agile teams. So anyway, all right, enough of me talking. Johanna, thank you for spending this time with us and your knowledge. So please take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and make sure I share just the right thing. And then I'm gonna pop out the chat so I can see if anybody has questions. Let me just give myself a little there. Okay, so I will be taking time for water, and every time I take time for water, that's a really good time for you to ask your questions. I will prompt you. All right, so let's talk about distributed component teams. The reason I'm actually doing this talk at all is because, Helen, was it you who saw my Pragmatic Manager newsletter? Maybe it was Ines, I don't remember. And about this particular topic. And I had written this newsletter talking about a program that hadn't delivered anything for a month. And a program is a collection of projects, all for one business deliverable, right? So there's the project for this and the project for that. You can think of it as project for search, project for sales, or payment types, whatever you need for your particular product. So I wrote this newsletter because this particular program was not delivering anything, had not delivered anything for over a month. Everyone was quite perturbed. And when I investigated, I asked about all these problems. Turns out that each team had people from across the globe. I'm going to talk about where they all were in just a couple of minutes. Because the team hadn't finished anything for a month, they were not delivering as the way we normally think a general agile team should deliver. Senior leadership is angry, the teams are unhappy. And when I investigated more, it turns out we did not have a cross-functional team. They had silos of teams in various time zones, but not nearly enough hours in the day to collaborate. And because they are silo teams, they are a component, not cross-functional. That means they all have interdependencies. The platform people need something from the UI people. The UI people need something from the middleware. It's all a mess, which is the technical term. And the worst part is the cycle time is very long, right? It's over a month before we see things, which means the throughput is very, very low. Now, senior leadership only wanted to blame people and say, heads are going to roll and we really need to deliver this right now. They had, there's this notion of cost of delay, which the longer it takes you to delay your releasing of your product, the longer it takes for you to recognize any revenue from that product. There's a whole bunch of other things, but even if you just push out when you release the product, you can tell you're not going to get any money from that product until you actually release it. So again, things are a mess. So I have 4 ideas in this presentation: the team's hours of overlap, how teams could work to reduce interdependencies, life cycles that might make sense, and the flow metrics to watch the work, not the people. All right, so let me talk about hours of overlap. This particular client called these people a team, right? They were certainly a collection of people, and they tried to collaborate. But the real issue is how much time did they have to collaborate with each other? They were in Atlanta, New York, Madrid, and Bangalore. Now I put Atlanta and New York higher up here because when the team is based in the US people think the team revolves around them. I say this again a lot later in the presentation. You can say that we are arrogant here. You can say that headquarters is a term that has little to no meaning when you have people dispersed across the organization, but that's what it was. So that's why Atlanta and New York are up here. Those are also the primary developers. So if you think about collaboration time, while it's possible for testers to create tests and get ready, they do need some code to test against. So let me talk about how you can look at the hours of overlap. This is from the earliest people who start working to the latest, right? So the first chart is, notice the people in India are only starting to work at 11:30 in the morning. Now, I don't know about you. Even if when I had children living at home, I no longer have them, which is a very freeing thing. My day started at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, right? So moving your hours to 11:30 in the morning is a huge change from the rest of your society, right? That these people were really trying to collaborate with everybody else on the supposed team, and the people in the UI in the front end managed to start a little bit later, but they started also late in the day. And now if you look at the middle of the day for the team, this is already kind of late at the end. It's at the end of the Indian people's day, and it's still it's the afternoon for the people in Europe, and in the US it's 8 in the morning. So this is they have already organized themselves to the most number of hours of overlap. This team has really worked hard to create hours of overlap so they could collaborate. And notice these are inconvenient times to collaborate, right? The Indian folks needed to eat dinner before, and they already started at 11:30 in the morning. Otherwise, this might be their ideal dinner hour. I mean, this is why it's a mess. And then because the team revolves around the US, the people in the US still have a full half day of work where they are the only ones working together. This is not a successful agile team. They don't have enough hours of overlap. It's not that people don't want to, they cannot because of where they are. Now, I did not do a value stream map for this particular team because, and show it in this presentation, because you would not believe me. Instead, let me talk about when people work as individuals and often as experts, as component teams do. The value stream, and you read the value stream map by looking at the work time above the line. I have those hours in blue, and the wait time is in red below that line. Now, notice this is only about 10 hours of work time, but it's 143 hours of total time because of all the wait time. And if I had done a value stream map, I don't think you would have believed me. I could have put it up here, but they had often a couple of months worth of delays to finish anything. So, and the way you see this is with the flow metrics. So I will talk about the flow metrics a little bit later. But the first thing is a value stream map. That way you can see which things take a long time. Now, Little Saw is all about it's about the throughput of the work, right? So if you have work in progress, that's a function of your cycle time times the throughput. So the lower your cycle time, the lower your throughput, the higher the width. And this is a causal loop diagram. The longer your cycle time, right, the longer things take to finish. That leads to lower throughput, that increases the aging of everything and increases the width. So if you ever have had trouble describing why your virtual team is not working well, often it's a function of Little Saw, that you have a lot of width, right? It's not just what you have in this iteration, if you're using iterations, but all the stuff that you had rolling over from iteration to iteration to iteration. It makes everybody nuts.
Johanna, can I ask a question?
Oh, please do. Yes.
In this table, the cycle time would be the full time with all the weights that you represented in last time. The throughput would be the time above the line.
So yeah, so cycle time is all this time.
Right. The 143 hours.
Right. And that's an example of a team that's working kind of well. But if you think about throughput, how much on average does your team finish in a week? Right? That's an approximation of throughput. Right. So
what would that be in terms of a unit of measure? Is that hours or is that some other measure?
A number of things, right?
Okay.
Hopefully those things are user stories.
Got it.
Right. But it's all about what does your team regularly deliver? Right. That's your throughput.
So then the WIP tells you how many things you'll have open in progress at any given time. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So, and I often start with WIP because it's really easy to see. What did we plan to do that's not yet done? That's on the board, that's in Jira, whatever, right? It's somewhere pretty obvious. Now, I wrote an article several years ago about where does work get stuck? And if you have experts, you can do things in the team, but as soon as you add what the expert has to do, you have things loop back to an earlier state, because everybody learns once people add their 2 cents, right? Once the UI experts add the UI, they realize, oh, we need a little bit of a change in the platform, or we need a little bit of a change in the database, or we need a little bit of a change in the middleware. I grew up as a programmer in the days of design by contract. Does anyone else remember design by contract? No, all you people are much younger. Okay. It didn't work then. We had documents. They defined the contracts. They didn't work then. They don't work now. I mean, we need to collaborate with each other to actually understand what we have to do. So you have options, though. All is not lost. So let me first talk about how teams can work to create more agility. And this is why I have this image here. What we want, the faster we can create slices of work through the architecture, the faster we can finish something useful. That's why I'm not a big fan of activity-based measures, right? How much did the requirements people work? That's irrelevant. How fast can we finish slice one is much more relevant, right? Regardless of your approach. I'm not talking about agile or non-agile. I'm saying until we have finished, hopefully user stories, something that's at least user or customer focused, the more agility we have. So the principles are collaborate wherever possible. This poor team was already collaborating as much as they could. Make small stories, because the smaller the story, the faster the slice. Always work through the architecture, and the more you can integrate code review with development and test review and all the other separate expertise-based approaches, the more you can integrate them, the better it is for the product, right? And this is, I'm not talking about a specific agile approach. I'm not talking about anything like that. These are all principles that work for lowering WIP and lowering cycle time and increasing throughput. Now, that requires policies for how the teams can work, not frameworks, not methods. It's all about the policies. Also, if you have a team that's this dispersed, don't use iterations. Instead, use a Kanban system so you can pull work in. The problem with iterations when you have, I'm going to go backwards now. Hopefully I will not confuse anybody. There. The problem when you use iterations is, when does the iteration start and when does it end? So if you focus the iteration around the US East Coast, what do those poor people in India and Europe do while the East Coast is still finishing their iteration? It does not make any sense. Instead, you can use a Kanban system, a Kanban approach instead, and always have continual planning and continual work. From chaos to successful distributed agile teams, I told a story of how one of the teams I facilitated always did planning on Mondays and Thursdays, always did a Kaizen on Wednesday, always did a demo on Friday morning that they recorded so anybody, anytime, anywhere could see it whenever they were back in the office. And that's just how they liked it. They had a cadence for almost everything. They never used time boxes for planning or anything like that, right? So that the cadence is a different thing than a time box. Now, the principles that I would like you to consider is limiting WIP at several levels. So the reason an agile approach works, regardless of whether you use iterations or Kanban, is you limit the WIP, right, the work in progress. In iteration, you limit by the number of items you planned for in this next iteration. If you're using Kanban, you might have real WIP limits on your board. I love WIP limits on the board. Love, love, love them. I do this myself. I find that this really helps me only work on one thing at a time. Because yes, I'm human. Yes, I have exactly the same problems as all of my clients. My appetite for work totally exceeds my ability to increase my throughput. It's just the way it is. So for the program, right, this larger effort, you can limit the number of feature sets in progress across the program. And for every team or a group of people who are trying to collaborate together, you can limit the number of stories. And create your successful agile project. I recommended that teams limit limit the WIP to the number of people on the team divided by 2, and then take the floor of that number. So if you have 8 people on a team, you would never have more than 4 items in progress. I think I was wrong. I would now limit the WIP to maybe a third of that, right? So that if you have 8 people on the team, never have more than 3 items in progress, maybe even 2. That forces a team to collaborate more as a cross-functional team. That would not have worked with this team because they're component teams across the world. So, but the more you can limit the WIP, the faster the cycle time and the faster the throughput. I'm going to stop for water because my nose is itchy. And any questions while I stop for water? Okay. So all of these principles are, I already talked about working through the architecture and not across, and daily check-ins. It's possible to make component teams work with daily check-ins. The whole idea is, how can we deliver value as often as possible? Value is user-focused, right? You might need a design document. You might need a requirements document. God, I thought we were past that. But even if we are not past that for your team, how fast can you deliver something that's valuable to a user of the system? Okay, I really like these kinds of check-in policies. First, right size the work. So every person or team can check in daily. When I talk about right sizing the work, I mean something that the team can do in about a day. Or with component teams, make it so it's possible for every expert to finish something so that they check in. And that means you have to keep the decisions and the work very small. So if you think about the component teams at all the levels of the architecture, if the UI people are checking in one little thing every day, and that includes the API, or maybe the API is part of the top level of the architecture, that's fine. And if everybody in the architecture checks something in every day. At some point, you will have one finished feature. Now, it's essential that everybody keeps the code and tests clean. Nobody can wait for somebody else to tell them that their code is clean. Nobody else can wait for somebody to tell them that their tests are clean, which means we probably have to do some pairing. When I was a developer, I excelled at my unit tests. I only wrote unit tests after I had written the code. I'm an old developer, it's fine. And I excelled at missing all of my defects. I would have multiple tests. I always missed all my defects. I could see them in other people's code. I could not see them in mine. It's fine. If you are facilitating this team, I like to ask the question, how often can you demo? And I would try and demo internally every single day. If you are checking in something every single day, can you demo every single day? And if you're looking at me like this woman is nuts, at the very least, how often can you demo every week? The team that always did a demo on Friday mornings, fine. They were capable of doing more demos more often, but they had come to the cadence of Friday mornings because that seemed to work better for the people who needed to see the demos. But if you have a very dispersed team that has very little capability of collaborating, then you probably cannot demo more often than once a week. Even once a week might really be a challenge. So if you think about how often can we release internally for feedback and then externally, right? As the demos and the releasing, they really help people understand. Is there a question? No? Okay. Now, I have not yet talked about this for the strategy, but every program and product needs an overarching goal. Why are we doing this product now? Who are our customers? What do they need now that helps you rank the backlogs? And how will we know that we have satisfied them? If you don't have an overarching goal for this particular product, you will not succeed. So an overarching goal is critical. So instead of trying to use an agile approach, I really like a combination life cycle. Now, there are many kinds of life cycle. Serial is when you start with requirements on one side and you end with release on the other, and you don't have any interim releases. An iterative life cycle often has either a prototype or a proof of concept, and then you harden it at the end. An incremental life cycle plans to release at various times during the project. And this combination life cycle has a little bit of requirements at the front, a little bit of prototyping, that's the iterative part, and then moving into incremental delivery. So when I say a little upfront work, I really mean a little. When I was back in the 80s, when I started to use this kind of a combination life cycle, I didn't allow anyone to spend more than a couple of weeks on requirements, because you can have requirements when out the wazoo. How about I worked on a product back in the mid 80s where the product manager actually had a 300-page document about all of the requirements for this one release. And I know some of you are shaking your heads because that's just silly. So I said, okay, tell me the first 3 things that you want. It was a program. I mean, it needed all 150 people, but there was no way we were going to deliver 300 pages of a requirements document. He said, oh, that's easy. This, and this. I said, okay, we will work on those. And we will work on those by first prototyping and then selecting a candidate architecture. And then we will move into increments of delivery. And when we have done enough, we will show you our progress. This is not for our customers. We will show you, product manager, our progress. So this is a combination life cycle. And now back then I did spend 6 weeks prototyping and then selecting a candidate architecture. I could have spent a lot less time because we changed the architecture as we proceeded. So, but the idea is you move into increments of value as early as possible and then as often as possible. Now, I already said don't use iterations if you have people that are far away. What I often do is say, if we have a milestone of show customers this thing or do a demo at this time, explain what that is for all the other people across the world, right? That, and literally say on June 20th, that's 3 p.m. Eastern, which is you would think I would know this by now, 12 p.m. Pacific and blah blah blah. Because the reason I have hours of overlap charts is because I can never remember the times. And what's worse is the times change as people in different states and countries move into summertime and wintertime, right? The whole world does not move into summertime on the same weekend. They don't move into wintertime on the same weekend. And there are states in the United States that never change. It makes me nuts. So I don't do that. That's why I always say, oh, and then there are the people that work Sunday through Thursday. When I was doing a bunch of work in the Middle East, specifically in Israel and then in Dubai, a lot of those people worked Sunday through Thursday. I had to translate what that meant for my schedule. Yeah, it's all, time is a continuum. And the more we accept that, the easier it is to say, what are the policies we can use for our project or program now? And the check-in policies of something small every day, finish it, make sure it's clean. Those kinds of policies work for every kind of project or program. Now, let me talk a little bit about life cycles. I'm going to take a sip of water. Any questions, any comments, please use the chat. Okay.
We're just having a bit of a requirement off on how long it takes to write a requirement document. We all have a lot of traumas from that, I think.
Yeah, trauma's a good way to talk about it. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about life cycles, because I like to think about risks when I think about the life cycle that matters to this particular effort. I'm going to talk about projects right now, but the same applies to programs. Now, one thing about an agile approach that requires a cultural change from independent work to a collaboration to an overarching goal. If you do not have collaboration to an overarching goal, you can use a combination life cycle. You can use iterations and increments. You can do all kinds of things, but don't expect it to be literally agile. It's not going to be. You can include agility in your effort, but not agile approaches. Because the very big question I have is, how long can you wait to learn something? An agile approach says we often learn something every single day, at minimum at the end of the iteration. So the shorter the iterations, the faster you learn. And that's the value of an agile approach. The learning cadence in an agile approach makes all the difference in the world. So the longer you postpone learning, the longer you have unplanned feedback loops. So for the particular program that started all of this, they were actually in requirements hell. They had started to do some requirements. They had iterated on the requirements. They got into analysis and said, oh, we have more requirements. They got into design. Oh, we have more requirements. They got into coding, yet more requirements. That's one of the reasons why their cycle time was so long. They could not really get to integration and test because they kept having unplanned requirements. And because they had very few hours of overlap, they felt they needed to update the requirements. Some manager asked for that, and I never did learn why. If you are supposed to have freezes, I have never seen a freeze that has not yet turned into slush. That's my thing. But the real issue is the unplanned feedback loops. When you get into requirements hell and you say, oh, we have analysis and design, and those change the requirements. Code changes the requirements. These unplanned feedback loops make everything take much, much longer and really hurt the people on the project or the program. It's crazy. So the incremental life cycles work really well for component teams that have very few hours of overlap, because you always start with the highest ranking feature or feature set. And then the design to schedule focuses on a release candidate. Stage delivery says we will release something. So the more you can release something useful, the faster you learn, and the faster you can decide what to do. So if you can release early and often, right, this is similar to an agile approach, but you're not iterating over the feature set as you go. You're releasing as much of it as you can, or as much of it as you choose as you proceed. So that's why an incremental life cycle is not the same as an agile approach. Now, let me talk a little bit about flow metrics. And if you want to help your managers change things, especially if you are part of a very dispersed team, I recommend you talk about the value of these things in ways your manager can understand. I really like to talk about customer acquisition and retention. The faster you can acquire customers and the longer you retain them, the more likely it is you have revenue. Revenue is an outcome of customer acquisition and retention. Revenue allows you to get money when your customers buy or sign up, and then service revenue ongoing, only if you retain them. So it's really important that you have a fast time to customer acquisition and retention. Cycle time is your friend. And the reason cycle time is your friend is the shorter your cycle time, right? I already talked about little saw. The shorter your cycle time, the higher your throughput. That allows you to reduce the number of aging items, which allows you to reduce the WIP. And then you have a stabilizing feedback loop where the more you reduce the WIP to some reasonable number, I don't know what the number is, right? I recommended some rules of thumb, whatever works for you, but that allows you to have a shorter cycle time with higher throughput and reduce the old items that prevent your customers from signing up and staying with you. So I always, if you are still using the three old stand-up questions, don't do that. I really like this question for understanding what we are doing. What's the one thing we should work on and finish, right? That allows us to start with our WIP, our work in progress. How old is our oldest item? Is that still valuable, right? You might start with aging, right? Where you have, oh my goodness, we have 25 things that we've been working on for months and months. Let's pick one, the oldest one. Is that still valuable? Should we stop, right? Should we, if it's not still valuable, we can stop working on it now, take it off our WIP. It's totally fine. But then, and then what should we change about our work so we can reduce our cycle time? Maybe if we are not collaborating now, maybe we collaborate better because we have more hours of overlap. We have not yet figured out that we could change our working hours. And how can we increase our throughput? What is challenging us for our throughput? Do we have unplanned feedback loops that make it more difficult for us to actually finish our work? So instead of asking any of those old stand-up questions, if you still, I don't recommend a stand-up anyway for dispersed teams. Instead, I strongly recommend you walk the board. And you walk the board when you have the most overlap you can, so people can choose how we will work. The more you think about changing the team's questions and data, the more likely you are to be able to talk to your managers about the flow metrics in a way that might support any change. So for example, when I worked with that team that had the testers in India, I said, you know, they have developers in India. They have UI people in India. You could have a cross-functional team in India and only have the product leaders have to talk to each other. That's a lot easier than the entire team. And the manager said, oh, okay. And that it changes how people think when you change the data you offer and you explain the implications of that data. So I really hope that you can find your way to fulfill your customers' needs. It's not about Agile, right? Agile is irrelevant. How can we satisfy the customer with really useful products? How can we manage our risks to release? How can we get revenue faster, right? If you use your risks to choose your best approach, you can then incorporate agility. And that agility, regardless of your approach, will bring everybody much joy and ease in their work. So I really hope that we stay in touch. Yes, I've written a bunch of books. I'm writing more. I really hope you decide to subscribe to the Pragmatic Manager newsletter. I would love to link with you on LinkedIn. There's the URL for this newsletter is here, and the Project Life Cycles book is there. I will stop the share because I want to see if there are questions. Okay. Oh, Kira. So, Neha, did I say your name correctly?
Yeah, sorry, I've just taken some time to come off mute, but yeah, that's my name.
Okay, all right. So the problem with Jira is unless you have created a Kanban board, no, they make it really hard.
Yeah.
So one thing I really like, if you are going to use Jira, and you probably don't have any, you probably have to. So let's just assume you have to for the sake of argument. Apply only have one person on one, have a representative person on one item, right? It might be half of team and the other half of the team, or something like that. And then you can get the cycle time by counting the days or the hours. And that's a fake outage error. But you probably have to do a little manipulation to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit manual, right? That is where I have to start doing it. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I've tried using Jira, but I think their charts are quite limiting. And if you integrate anything, it's not easy because most of those reports are paid. And sometimes you can't integrate within your organization.
You decide how much of City Hall you need to fight, right? I am not going to tell you what to fight in your organization. Everyone has limited energy and some things are just not worth it. So yeah, fake Jira out. Make a kludge and that might work for you. Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So Matt asks, you suggested no stand-up for distributed teams and use the time to walk the board. Can you provide more details? If you walk the board and say, what's the first thing we need to do to finish? And you only need one or two things, that's it. That's your stand-up. Now you might need to do some handing off, right? If you don't have enough hours of overlap, right? Let's assume these poor people in India said, no, I have children. I want to start work at 9 and end at 5 or 6 or whatever. And there's no overlap or whatever, minimal overlap. That's where you might use a time to do a little handoff. And I recommend you actually write things down and in some kind of a standard way. So you can say, the one thing I worked on today was this. I got to this point. I have these questions, or I need Johanna to do this thing now, or whatever, right? But not to make yourself crazy with the handoff.
Right. I think with that board up, certainly dealing with the asynchronous teams, you figure there would be people looking at it at different times when you weren't there. So it just sounds like you're making a little add-on to the process of here's how you continue after I'm not here. Good, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? I think I hit my time box, Helen.
Nice one, Joanna. Actually, I was reading because we do ask for questions before people signs up. And there is a theme that you haven't touched there. Actually, most of the things asked there is being covered by your presentation, so that's great. But so the one, I guess, that maybe you can give us a little bit of insight is when even you have featured teams, you still need to collaborate with other teams and or even the architecture, right? So you slice the cake in a different way, and then there has to be some sort of architecture sense so that you don't do the same thing across multiple areas and stuff. Any advice, any tips, or how do you handle that, especially at program level?
So that's where socializing the architecture works really well. Always having a candidate architecture, always updating the architecture on paper as you proceed. I have a lot more of this in Agile and Lean program management and on my blog. And if I will give you some blog posts to put with this video so that people can really see that. Architecture is a really big deal, and we rarely get it right the first time. So the real key is how many feedback loops and how fast do they need to be before we learn enough to say, yes, this is our architecture. So I will give you some blog posts about 3 candidate architectures I have used in programs, and how what those look like, and when you have to solidify, for lack of a better word, the architecture.
All right, that seems like a plan. Thank you so much. And I will also take the opportunity to put a little link in the chat, literally 3 questions for gathering feedback. What do you want guys to know about? What do you want to share? You know, we are all ears.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it, isn't it? That's a wrap. So Johanna, thank you so much to come on the Virtual Agile meetup. It's been just wonderful to hear you speak about these things that we all struggle so much with. So
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I really loved being here.
yeah, brilliant. We've had lots of good comments, and I know that some people have had to drop. So you're honestly, it's been incredibly valuable. I'm sure you realize that. So adios, folks. See you next time.